Welcome to another episode in the 3018 Pro CNC series. In today's episode we were meant to be looking at the laser, but I felt we were missing quite a big gap in going from a basic test cut straight over to the laser. So what we're going to do is bridge that gap, and we're just going to learn a little bit more about a piece of design software, how to create your own designs, how to export the G-code from them, and then again send that G-code over to the CNC machine. So let's get stuck in. There are lots of pieces of software we can use to create our designs, but being beginners we want to start with something quite simple. Typically this is going to be Easel or Carbide Create. Both programs have their pros and cons, but for today we're going to focus on Easel. Easel is a web-based program created by Inventables. Inventables are also the company that produced the X-Carve. This is relevant for later on when we're looking at the settings, because we'll notice that some things are not quite right. I also mentioned it's a web-based program. This means the majority of the work is done via your internet connection on their servers. So if you don't have a good internet connection, you may find this can be a little bit sluggish. If we click Explore Easel, it will take us to a page and ask you to either log in or create an account, and then once you've created an account you can use the software. So we'll just sign in now. And once this loads, it brings up your home. From here we can click New Project and it will load up our working area. On the left hand side we've got the area where we will create our design. On the right hand side we've got the visualizer, and this shows us in a 3D model what our image may look like or should look like. The first thing we want to tell Easel is the type of machine we're using. So if we head up to Machine, and first we'll change this from an X-Carve to Other GRBL, and then from the model you can either select the 3018 or the Sainsmart. I'm going to stick with the 3018 because I know that one works correctly. The next thing we need to set is the work area. Now we know our X and Y axes are not both 300, one is 180, so we'll get that updated now. And as you'll see, that's reflected straight away in the work area and the visualizer. The other settings we can leave the same for now. If we come off that, now what we'll notice is this has been updated to reflect the work area that we can use, but the dotted line is showing the size of the material that's currently in place, and as you can see on here it's overhanging. So the next thing to do is set the material that we're going to be working with. We're going to be working with plywood, but the piece that we'll be using today is 100mm by 100mm by 12mm. And straight away that's updated into our work area now. You'll see that when we switched over to the 3018 model we got this caution message. This is just saying that the software isn't primarily designed for 3018, so some of the settings may not be correct, and we'll cover this later. So looking back at the work area and the visualizer, we'll notice in this bottom left hand corner there is a black dot. This is the home point or the 0 point for which the cutting paths will start, and it's useful to remember that for later on. So now we've got our piece of wood that we'll be working with, we can start to look at some of the tools within Easel. We won't cover these in too much detail, but we'll go through them briefly. So to start with, you can insert different types of shapes, and it allows you to resize them, move them about and rotate them. You can also just delete them with your keyboard and do that with another shape. We can insert that, we can stretch it and again rotate it and move it all about on the work area. The next tool is the pen tool, and this allows you to draw more free-form shapes. And once you connect it up, it completes the shape. You've got a type tool, and this is useful if you're creating signs. It's got a selection of preloaded fonts, and if you're a pro member you can also add your own fonts, and we'll talk about this a bit later on. But it's quite simple. You select what you want and you can type in anything that you need. we'll delete that for now. You've also got a list of icons that can be used, some quite common icons that you can insert into your designs. The tool that we're going to be focusing on today to start with is the import option. This allows you to import various types of file that you can use to create your designs. So I'm going to import an SVG file. This is a vector format file that you can create in different programs like Adobe Illustrator, and it's just an editable file that allows you to manipulate it. You can change the shape, size of different things. So I've already got my logo loaded in, and by default it loads it into the bottom left hand corner. But I'm just going to drag this roughly into the center because that's roughly where I want it to cut. And as you'll see, as I'm moving this about, it's updating in the visualizer, and this is now showing in the center. But what looks a little bit odd is that it's missing a lot of the detail here. The reason for this is because the bit is set to a 1/8 inch upcut bit, and that's quite a chunky bit to be using to doing fine detail. So what we'll do now, just to pull all the detail back through, is select a 30° V-carve bit, and this is much finer. And straight away you'll see all that detail has now come back into the design that's over on the left hand side. Going back to our SVG file that we've just imported, although it imported it as one piece, you can see that you can select different elements of it in order for you to edit and change and manipulate it. The other thing that you'll notice is on the JD, that's going straight through to the bed, and that's because it's cutting that at the full depth. So if we highlight all the various elements of the design and we adjust the depth, you'll see that adjusts live in the visualizer again. For the purpose of today, I only want this to cut about 1.5 mm deep, just to keep it quite a quick cut. Now as you'll see, that is in there quite shallow. But let's say for example we wanted to cut something much deeper and leave the other part shallow. You select the part that you want, and then you can adjust the depth of that part individually. It gets darker on your design, and it also gets darker and deeper on the visualizer. And this is just so that you can cut different elements of your design at different depths and give it more texture. The other thing to notice as well is the cut path options down here. For this episode we're just going to use the pocket cut, and what that does is removes the majority of the material in between the pieces. But if you just wanted more simple options like an outline, you've also got those available in different options, whether it's the inside of the path, the outside of the path, or cutting on the path. But we'll leave that as a pocket cut for now. And I'm also going to reset the JD part back to 1.5 mm. And there we have our design roughly how we want it. Now the next thing we need to take a look at is the cutting bits themselves. Easel has a selection of preloaded common cutting bits that you can use, and obviously you'll need to own these bits to insert in your CNC machine, so it's good to know what thickness bits you are using. And this is also relevant when it comes to the simulate button. So the simulate roughly generates the cutting paths that are needed to produce your design. And if we click on this now, it'll generate the tool paths, and it'll also give us an estimate of how long it takes to cut. And that's 1 hour and 19 minutes. For quite a small design, that's a long amount of time in order to produce this detail. The reason being, it's having to get rid of all of this blue area with quite a fine tip. The tip on a 30° V bit is about 0.1 mm. So it's having to do a lot of work to get rid of this mass material. And we can improve that by doing a dual cut. This is where you use one bit to get rid of all the mass material, and then you swap over for a finer bit to do the detailing and the edging. This is typically called roughing and then detail. To do this, if we go up to here and we'll add an additional bit. Now Easel tells us that it needs a V bit to do the detail, but we can select another bit to do the roughing out. So if we click yes, and what we're going to use today is a 1/16 inch bit upcut. So we'll select that. And now what we can see is we have the 16th inch upcut bit and the 30° V bit. And if we run the simulator again, we'll see it's now generated 2 cutting paths. One will take approximately 10 minutes, one will take approximately 15 minutes. So that's cut quite a lot of time off our cutting. The other thing we need to take a look at is the cut settings themselves. Now, when I mentioned Easel is designed for the X-carve, this is where it starts to affect some things. So it loads some rough settings in, but it doesn't know if these are correct for our machine. These speed rates for me are a bit too fast, so we're going to lower them down, and this just helps to make sure that it cuts smooth, it cuts neat, and it doesn't ruin any of the bits. So if we click on custom, and I'm going to lower this down to about 450. Now I'm happy with the plunge rate, and I'm going to take the depth per pass down to 0.5mm just to be safe. And I'm going to do the same on the V-carve bit as well, and put the same settings in for that. So we'll take that down to 450. We'll reduce this down to 0.5, and we'll leave them both at that. Now, one thing to note is because I've just reduced the speed of the cut settings, when we click simulate again, it's added a little bit of time onto the cutting paths, but it's better to go slower and have a better cut than to go fast and break your bits. So now we're happy with our design, we know roughly the cut paths and how long it's going to take. We can now get ready to export the G code. So if we come up to machine, come down to advance, and we've got the generate G code button. Now, I mentioned that Easel has a pro option, and what Easel wants to do is to push you towards subscribing to their package. But the one good thing about Easel is that if you don't want to subscribe, they still give you 4 free pro days per month. And what this means is you can use all the pro features 4 times a month without worrying. And that's what we're going to do today to get our G code. Because one of the pro features is the V-carve bit that we're going to use, along with some other things like the fonts that we saw earlier. So let's activate one of our free pro days. When you click on the generate G code button, you'll be prompted with this, and this is trying to persuade you to sign up to the pro package. But if you come down to the bottom and click use a free day, that tells you now have 24 hours remaining on your free day, and we can do as many carvings as we want in that time. So if we come back out of it, and we'll generate G code, and what this will do now is produce us 2 G code files, one for the roughing and one for the detail. We need to download both of these, so we'll click on them, and that's everything that we need from Easel. We can now move over to UGS. Now we've got UGS open, it is worth mentioning Easel can run the G code itself to your machine, but with it being a web-based software, I like the independence of knowing that UGS can run offline if it needs to. So now we've got UGS open. If you've not seen my previous video, I'd suggest taking a look at this. It shows you roughly how to use UGS and connect it up to the machine. But now we're here, what we're going to do is load the G code in. We're going to start with the roughing first. Now, as you'll see, this only looks like it's got part of the design. The reason for this is because it's just roughing out the mass area. So the fine detail that will be done by the V-carve, it's excluded that for the moment. But note that the starting point, or the 0 point, is exactly the same on both of them. So I'm just going to disconnect and reconnect my machine just to make sure it's talking to each other. There we are, and that's brought our controls back. So I'm just going to switch over to the CNC machine now, because what we need to roughly do is set the 0 point. So I'm just going to move this about until we're approximately in the corner. I'll bring the feed rate up a bit, that is a little bit low, that was from a previous file. Let's bring this across a little bit. And now we're just going to lower the Z until it's roughly touching the top of the wood. Okay, so now if we reset the 0, we should be good to start this off. Now with the rough cut done, we'll give it a bit of clean. And we'll also get the bit changed over. With the bit changed over, we can now load in the detail cut. And with that loaded in, we'll lower the Z axis down and reset our Z point. And we'll send it to cut the detail. And now we have it straight off the bed. Detail's pretty good on it. Might need a fine sand around the edges, but I'm happy with the way that's come out. As always, the files that I've used will be below in the description, but hopefully that gives you an idea of how to use the software to create your own designs. If you've enjoyed the video, please click like and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one.